Hey everybody, this is Mr. Storm. This week we are going to learn about raster images. So let's talk about them. So, a raster image is essentially an image that's made up of a bunch of different pixels. So what is a pixel? Well, a pixel is the smallest discrete element of an image or a picture, usually a single colored dot or square. The greater number of pixels per inch, the greater the resolution of your image. If you look at a pixels per inch readout, anything higher than 72 is considered high quality for online viewing. Bitmap or raster. This is a method used for storing a computer graphic file that contains dot-to-dot representations of the original graphic image. So, raster images or bitmap images, I call them raster images, they're essentially just a picture file that just saves the data for each pixel, each individual pixel in that image, right? And it says, all right, so this image has, I don't know, 1 billion pixels, and pixel 1 has this value for the color, which would be some, number as for the representation of the color, and it's in this position. And that file, that computer file, is essentially just a series of that information. Now, we have software that allows us to open up those files and see them in full view, right? We can see what that picture is. Now, a couple of raster file types are JPEG. JPEG is a raster file type. PNG is a raster file type. So most pictures you look at are going to be raster images. The other option is vector graphics. Vector graphics are graphics that are defined by using coordinate points and mathematically drawn lines and curves, which may be freely scaled and rotated without image degradation in the final output. This is essentially just, we're going to make an image, but instead of having each individual pixel be represented with a set of discrete data, we're going to use math to draw that image every time we scale it up and make it bigger. So with raster images, if we scale them up or we make them, much bigger, then we can start seeing the pixels and the image quality degrades. With a raster image, every time we scale it up, the image gets redrawn, right? And so it never loses quality no matter how big we make it. So we're not going to be dealing with vector graphics in this class. This class is going to focus on raster graphics. But just know that if you're designing a logo or something that needs to be blown up in a large format, you may want to use vector graphics. The problem is vector graphics are really expensive on the hardware. By that I mean they take up a lot of hard drive space, and it takes a bit of processing power to actually display them properly. So raster graphics are usually the safest bet. So let's talk about what you can do with a raster graphic object. Well, you can crop it. Cropping is just essentially trimming the edges of the photo out. So let's say we have a picture and the subject of my picture is in the middle and I don't want all this extra miscellaneous stuff around it. I can crop the picture, make it smaller, and cut out all the extra stuff I don't want. A fill, it's a pattern, a color, or a tint applied to the inside of a closed object. Basically, if I draw a square on an image, inside of that square would be the fill, right? The outside would be the stroke, inside is the fill. Opacity, this is the ability to see through one object to the objects below them. So when we're using layers in Photoshop, opacity is important because if I want to be able to see through a layer, then I can change the opacity. Resizing. When we resize a raster object, we increase either the horizontal or vertical size of the image, or both at the same time. We are essentially resizing the pixels as well. Think about it like this. At its regular native resolution, whatever it is, the pixels are going to be as small as they need to be in order to represent that image at the highest quality. But if we then stretch that image and make it bigger, those pixels have to then stretch and get bigger as well, right? And so that's going to make our image look a lot blockier and gross. Look a lot blockier and more gross. There we go. So we want to make sure we don't resize pictures bigger than their native resolution, right? We're always good to shrink pictures as small as we need them to be, but we don't really want to make pictures bigger, all right? Shadowing. So this is an offset angle that's applied, or an offset angle shadow that you can apply to texture graphics. Basically, if I put a shadow behind my text, that'll give some separation between the text itself and the objects on my screen, right? So it'll separate it a bit, and it'll make it easier for my text to be read, and it looks kind of nice. You can put shadows on really anything you want. Skew. Skew allows you to take an object that is like this and tilt it. Yep, you can skew it. You can skew objects. Bloop. Stroke. Stroke is the width of the line outside of an object. So with fill, it's the inside, stroke is the outside, and we can change the width, the color, all that stuff. Grouping. We can take multiple objects and we can put them together in Photoshop. We can group them together so that they, whenever I move one, I move the other, right? We can group objects. Layering. This is something that we've been using in Photoshop already. We can put one object on top of another object, and then we can manipulate the bottom object independent from the top object, but they look like they're together, right? Layering is incredibly important in Photoshop. Text wrapping. So this is when you're writing text into a text box, and the text is too big to fit into the exact text box, so it kind of pushes the word down to the next line. That's called text wrapping. And we can also indicate how our text wraps around specific objects. So like if we have an image in the middle of a paragraph, the text will wrap around that image depending on how we set it. Watermark. A watermark is a pale image or text printed onto a piece of paper. Usually watermarks are there so that we can maintain ownership of a document or something like that. All right, let's talk about image manipulation software. The software we use in this class is Photoshop. There are other free versions. There are other free image manipulation software out there like GIMP or Pixlr or Photopea, which is a web-based photo manipulation software that you can use on your Chromebooks at home. But our class focuses on Photoshop. So let's talk about raster images in a bit more depth. So raster images are built using individual pixels. This old school picture of Mario here, the pixels are really large. I can actually see the pixels in the image. And I can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's roughly about 12 or 13 pixels across here and probably about 15, 16 pixels high. And this makes up an image by filling in each of these pixels with a specific color. Now, this is a higher quality picture of Mario here, which has many, many more pixels. These pixels are much harder to see, but they're there. If we zoomed in on this image enough, we would be able to see the pixels popping up. But because it's a higher resolution, we actually don't see the pixels as predominantly as we see in this image. So as you enlarge a raster image, the pixels will grow in size as well, and they will get, they'll look a lot more blocky. Your artwork will look blocky and gross. Now we can fit a lot more data in files, whereas back in the day, old school video games, we could only fit so much data for our artwork. Now we can fit a lot of data, and Photoshop can handle really any sized image you want to throw at it. So there are a lot of things we can do to raster images. We can just basically change the pixels in a raster image. That's really what Photoshop is best at. Changing the individual pixels so we get something new. We can crop, we can do color correction, we can composite, we can do all kinds of stuff with our images in Photoshop. So cropping. So this is essentially what cropping looks like, right? We shrink down the available size of our image and we cut out any extra stuff that we don't need. Now, it doesn't look like this in Photoshop. Cropping is a bit different in Photoshop. We'll talk about that. But cropping is an important design decision that you need to make. Sometimes you don't need the whole image. Sometimes you only need a certain part of the image. Maybe crop everything out that you don't need. Color correction. Some pictures, the color is wrong, right? The colors are all washed out. There's red eye in the picture. Just weird color fragments, color anomalies that just don't look great. Using Photoshop, we can actually change the colors of any image in Photoshop. This is one that was, this was, it's not great looking over here. It's a bit too warm. The colors are a little bit burned in here on her face. It wasn't really showing a lot of definition. But over here, when we apply some color correction, the picture is much sharper. It's much better looking. It stands out more. And it's a better color profile for this image. So we can even take a black and white photo and add color to that photo. We can colorize a black and white photo, which is what we're going to do this week. Compositing. So when someone says that an image was photoshopped, this is essentially what they mean. They mean that somebody took an image and another image and cut them together and made it look like they existed in the same image, right? This picture here of this woman, this is a series of photographs that have all been edited together. So this background photograph is probably one. Up here, that's probably one photograph. The picture of her is probably a separate photograph. The fish down here, the grass, the background here, these are all separate photographs that have been cut together to make it look like, give the illusion that this image is exactly what it looks like, right? Now, in order to make a truly convincing composite, you have to do things like match the lighting and the shadows, match the color. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to do in the next couple of weeks to learn how to composite images properly and effectively in Photoshop. All right, so that's a little bit about raster graphics. Just know that all we're doing really is just manipulating pixels. We're just changing the color of pixels. That's all we're doing. It just doesn't look like it because the pixels are really, really, really tiny. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be fun. I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with because this is when the class gets really interesting. So I'm going to let you guys get started, and I will see you next time.